So now we've adjusted our transparency settings for all of our images, all the sources for the layers. We've also changed the blend modes. Now it's time to start positioning these elements in 3D space to create the heads-up display. But before we do that, let's remember that our original footage that's going to be our background has a camera move in it. So we want to track that camera data from the original background footage and apply it to every single layer we have here inside Action. Now we could go to each individual axis and then enter the tracker and perform a track and then save the track and reload it and so on. Much more efficient way would be to create an axis that is going to be used as our tracking data and just feed that information into each individual layer. That will give us an extra layer of transformation control of each layer. Now, a very important part about performing tracking in the Action tool. If I go to my Media tab once again, we can see that B for background is empty. We never fed anything into the background. When you go into the tracker is always looking at the background input as its reference to use as the tracking data. Right now, we've got the footage that we want to use as our background imported as an individual layer, and that's not what I want. So I can delete this layer by holding the Option key, selecting the axis number 9, and drag it down to the bottom of the UI, and now it is deleted. In this view, I'll hold Option and hit the Escape key to go back out to Connect Effects. On the Action tool, this green input is your background input. So I want to take the output of this Mux node and feed it into the input for the background. An easy way to do this, especially when nodes are far away from each other, if I click and highlight the green input for the Action node, come down, I'm not holding any hotkeys, and I click on the yellow output of the Mux node, the connection is made automatically. Now you can see on the media list, the Mux node, which is Mux node 72, which is what's applied to our background image, has been brought in as our background. I'll now select the Action tool once again and hit the Escape key to step back in. Just for reference, you never see your background as an image source inside the Action schematic. The only places you have indication that there is a background image is on the Media tab itself right here, or what's connected on the node out in Connect Effects. Alright, so as I said a minute ago, I do not want to have to perform the track on every single one of these axes. That just wouldn't be very efficient. So we go to our Action bin. I'll double click on the Axis tool in my Action bin. An axis has now been added. Just for organization, I'm going to name this track. I'll double click on the axis to get its parameters available to me. I'll make sure it reads track under the stabilizer button, and I'll click on the button that reads stabilizer to step into the tracker. Let's zoom back a little bit by clicking over here in the field. I get one tracker box. I'll position it somewhere right here on this light, and I'll just click the Analyze button and let smoke go through the 192 frames. So as I said, the point of this workflow is we will now be able to use this axis and the tracking data that we are analyzing right now and feed it into every single layer. So once it's done, which it is, I choose Return. I now take this tracker, as I showed you earlier, if you hold the Shift key, you can kiss and connect your nodes. So I hold the Shift key, and I'm just going to go along and kiss all those nodes right there. And then I want to select and kiss the top node, axis 10, to make sure that is now attached. As we scrub through, you can see now all those elements are moving around based on the transformation data that is in this axis created by the tracker. All right, let's now start arranging our individual layers in 3D space. To do this properly, I want to look at 3 views. I want to look at my camera view. I want to look at my schematic to easily access or select the proper axis to adjust. And I want to see what we call the working view, so I can rotate the view, so I can look at the different elements in 3D space in a perspective view. So for my 2-up option, my flyouts, I will choose 3-up split. I'll select the top view, and I'll hit the Escape key. So now I access my schematic here. I can also select the dividing bar of the viewport and drag it up a little bit, and then I'll hold the Control command and pan down a little bit so I see the axes all in a row. I'll click this viewport on the left. It is set to default camera. That is what I want. but I do want to zoom back a little bit. So I'll choose the flyout that I have over here and click the fit option. I'll select this view on the right, and this is the one that I want to be what we call the working view. The hotkey is Shift F4, but I'll show you that if I go to my viewing flyout, I can go to my 3D views and choose the top option. As I said, Shift 4 is that hotkey. I'll hold Command Option and zoom back a little bit like this. And then I'll go to my tools and I'll switch to be the Orbit tool. Now I can rotate this view and move it around to look at the elements in 3D space. Notice that the background does not rotate with your view. The background, as I said earlier, is always just a main input for your background that you cannot transform or manipulate. If you wanted to, you could hide your background by coming down on the Media tab. You have the option for back on or back off. I'll leave it on just for right now. I just wanted to explain to you the different options you have for displaying your background and not displaying the background. Let me switch back to my Select tool. I could have used Shift M. Now we'll start manipulating each individual layer in 3D space. So I'll pan up and zoom back a little bit so I can see the different axes next to each individual image, because that's what I'm going to manipulate. Let me take this axis and bring this down, because that's going to control both Arthur and the chat. I will double click on the axis for the window image. Now I should mention that the adjustments we're about to make obviously were an experiment. There was time that was taken to figure out the best positioning in Z-Space and the scaling properties to get the desired end result. I'm going to give you the individual parameter settings that did achieve the end result. But understand that you can come over here into your sliders and start manipulating each element in 3D space, whether it's the scaling option, whether it's the Z position, and so on. But a great option that I do want to mention is this auto scale option. If you want to move something in Z-Space, whether it's further away from the camera or closer to the camera, but you do not want it to appear that it has been moved further away from the camera or closer to the camera, you should turn on this auto scale option. For demonstration, I will take the Z position for my window layer, and if I move it toward the camera, obviously you can see in the camera view, the default camera view on the left, it appears larger. If I drag it to a negative where it's further away from the camera, obviously it will appear to be getting smaller because it's moving away from the camera. Let me undo that, Command Z. I'll enable the auto scale. I'll set it to on all transforms. Now watch in the two views what's about to happen. As I move it in Z-Space, I'll take it to a negative 435 or so. Notice that the scale parameter was automatically adjusted. Now it did appear to move in the camera viewport because it is offset by the tracking data axis. But as far as the scale of it, it never seemed to change because it was automatically adjusted for us. Then if I wanted to make an adjustment to the Y position or the X, I could do that also. I'll set the Y value to 106. Let me select the axis for the screen image. I want auto scale on for this also. So I enable it, and I want to bring the Z position for this axis also in a negative value. Somewhere around negative 256 should be fine. And then I'll click in the X field and make an adjustment to this parameter and set this to about 20 or 22. Now I'll click on axis number 4. This is the axis that's controlling the code image. Now remember what I said earlier though. This footage of the code starts at black. And if we scrub through, you'll see it does appear on the screen. You can see it there. But for the first several frames, we see nothing while it first starts to type onto the screen. So let's go back and use our Mux node to adjust that so that we see something from the first frame. So I'll select this view over on the right. This is my working view. I'll hold Option and hit Escape. Now we're looking at the schematic view for Connect Effects. I'll hold Control Command. I'll pan forward. You'll see there is that image. I'll click and select the Mux node to access its parameters. Now here's an interesting workflow for you. This viewport on the left is set to be the result. So whatever I select, that is what's going to be displayed in it. But I want to make an adjustment to the Mux node while seeing the end result of the Action tool. Obviously, if I select the Action tool, we see the end result here. But when I select the Mux node, I see the end result of the Mux node. So let's create a context point, which allows us to look at any part of our flowchart and work on other elements. So I'll right click over in this schematic on my action node. I'll choose Set as Context. You'll notice now it gets a little highlight and also the letter and number C1 appear before its name. Now, I click on this viewport to activate it. From the flyout, I'll come here and choose Context 1. Now this is going to be looking at the Context 1 no matter what tool I select inside of my schematic. Now I can select the MUX node in the schematic, and I can also hit the F4 key in this view to see the output of the MUX node. So I can see the context view on the left and the actual end result of the MUX node in this view. So F4. Now what we're seeing here is actually not the output I want to see. The MUX node has multiple outputs, one of them being a mat. And technically this MUX node doesn't have a mat, but it still has a mat output. So that's what we're seeing. So what we need to do is hit F4 again. Now we're seeing the main output of the MUX node. So keep that in mind with any node that has multiple outputs. By repeatedly hitting the F4 key, you can toggle through and view the different outputs. Now if I go to the timing offset and I set it to a value of 20 or so, we will actually start the playback of the 20th frame at the first frame of my Connect effects. And then under effects range, I'll leave from set to 1, but I'll put the 2 to frame 30. Lastly, for the after option, I'll set this to ping pong plus. Now as I scrub through, we can see that the code is being written on and off and ping-ponging back and forth throughout the 192 frames of my Connect effects. Alright, I want to go back to looking at my action schematic and my two action outputs. So I'll activate the left viewport. I first need to select the action tool to do that. So Option Escape, go back to your schematic for Connect effects. Make sure your action tool is selected. Immediately we see our action schematic reappear in the top view. And because I had this viewport set to the output, it is now showing the output of the action tool. So let's just switch this viewport over here to be our working view. So I go back to the action 3D views, I choose working, and I can zoom back again so we can see all the elements in 3D space. But you can also see that the code is now displayed on the first frame. So let's select the axis for the code. I am not going to turn on auto scale for this. I want the image to change its size as I make adjustments to the Z position. So I'll set this to -245. I also want to take the X and move it in a negative value of 195. Enter that by clicking on the calculator, -195. And for the Y-axis of the position, I will set it to be 40.